Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar From Risk to Resilience Securing Salesforce Data in a World of Unstoppable Threats and Integration Risks. This webinar is brought to you by Veeam and Salesforce and is produced by SmartBrief, a future B2B company. So let's face the reality. Phishing attacks, insecure integrations, and misconfigured APIs are no longer rare, they're routine. As Salesforce environments become more interconnected, the data flowing through APIs and third-party integrations is increasingly vulnerable to exploitation. Attackers are targeting endpoints, abusing OAuth flows, and injecting malicious payloads into trusted systems. Luckily, today we have an interactive session planned for you with Sam Nichols, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Veeam, and Matt Myers, author, CEO, and co-founder of Easy Protect, to discuss how we can't prevent every threat from happening, but we can build resilient systems that protect the data, detect anomalies, and recover quickly. I'm excited to get started, so I'm just going to cover off a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to get our speakers up here on stage with me. So first and foremost, introductions are in order. My name is Mackenzie Puddesy. I am your moderator here with SmartBrief, but I want to give you all a chance to introduce yourselves, say a quick hi, hello, how are you? And I've already seen quite a few of those coming through the chat tab, but if you've just joined us or if you haven't quite found that yet, on the upper right-hand side of your console, you're going to see a chat tab. So we've got Lee Wong in from California, Andrew from California. We've got a couple San Franciscans in the house, Dennis from Carlsbad, Matt from Chicago. Hello, hello. Raymond from Toronto, Canada. Hello there. Awesome. So feel free to say hi, hello in there. We want this to be a really interactive session. So we love to get your feedback, your ideas, your comments, your hot takes. So throughout this session, throw this in the chat, and our presenters and myself will do our best to keep an eye on those and respond in real time. Now, before we move on with our tour, I do want to mention if there's any technical issues that you have during the session, this is also the perfect place to give us a quick shout. Let us know. Myself and Riley, who's our webinar coordinator, running things smoothly in the background, will be here to help and troubleshoot with you. That said, first line of defense, most of the time, if audio slides, video aren't loading, aren't syncing up, try a quick browser refresh, and that usually does the trick. There's also a light mode you can toggle on in your audience console if you're on limited bandwidth, traveling on mobile, something like that. All right, now mentioning the interactivity, we do want your questions. And again, our presenters are going to be fielding questions in real time. So feel free to throw those in the Q&A tab on the right-hand side there. And we'll do our best to answer those throughout the presentation. Finally, we've also got the Docs tab there. So in the Docs tab, we've got some great supporting materials, some different information or sources where you can get some follow-up and go further on this conversation and also keep tabs on our presenters today. So there's a link in there to Matt Myers' book, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, as well as the LinkedIn page for Low Code Security Alliance, which you can check out, follow, and get some different updates over time. From Veeam, we've also got an ebook, which is entitled Critical Capabilities for Salesforce Backup and How Veeam Delivers. So definitely grab that, download it. You're going to want to read that, maybe share it with somebody on your team or another industry colleague. And finally, you can also get a demo that you can book in with Veeam on the Veeam Data Cloud for Salesforce. So again, all of this will become more apparent, more relevant throughout the presentation today, but don't forget and sleep on those docs and forget to download and save those. Alrighty, last little bit of fun. We do have a prize to give away at the end of today's session. You do need to be live and present throughout the duration of the webinar to qualify for the prize, and you also need to meet the prize terms and conditions. Those are linked in the Docs tab there if you are curious to check those out, but I'll be drawing the $250 Amazon gift card at the end of the session, so stay tuned for that. And otherwise, I think it is time to get our speakers out here with us. So again, formally excited to introduce you all to Sam Nichols, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Veeam, as well as Matt Myers, CEO and co-founder of Easy Protect. Matt, I'm going to get you to sort of take things from here, get you up on stage, introduce yourself further, and then Sam, feel free to go right after Matt. Gentlemen,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mackenzie, for what's such a wonderful intro, and I saw a lot of people calling from all over the US. So, fun fact, I'm actually calling from Paris right now from a Salesforce show I attended yesterday. So, that's really interesting. So, anyway, thank you everyone for joining us for Risk to Resilience, Securing Salesforce Data in a World of Unstoppable Threats and Integration Risks. My name is Matt Myers, and I am a Salesforce certified technical architect and co-founder of the company Easy Protect. I have over 18 years experience in the Salesforce ecosystem and author of the book Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, a book about a real live breach that happened from one of my Salesforce customers. I also host the biweekly series Salesforce Security Office Hours, and it's my mission in life really to help people ensure that their data is protected and secure in Salesforce. I'll go and pass it over to Sam.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the warm welcome, Matt, and Mackenzie as well, and welcome everyone here. I can see some folks from Wisconsin as well, which is where I am based. Definitely not as fancy as Paris, San Francisco, or some of the other cities, but happy to be joining you from very cold Wisconsin. As you've heard multiple times now, Sam Nichols, Senior Director at Veeam for our Veeam Data Cloud Solutions. That's a SaaS-hosted solution to ensure resilience for all of your data, irrespective of where it resides. Of course, we're going to be talking about Salesforce today. I've been with Veeam for 10 years now. Kind of came on when Veeam was a single self-managed product for virtual machines, and seen us grow into supporting 162 different workloads, including our SaaS platform as well. Of course, we're talking about Salesforce, SaaS platform itself. A lot of folks want to protect SaaS with SaaS. So super excited to talk to you today, mostly about just best practices, kind of what Matt, myself are seeing going on in the industry, in the market, and some of the things that you guys can be doing to help better make sure that you're resilient in the face of anything that might go wrong. So I guess in the vein of talking about things that might go wrong, like Matt, let's talk about some of the things that we've seen go wrong recently.
Sure. So, and as I was kind of mentioning, I just got off of another talk yesterday here in Paris, and I always start my talks with some interesting metrics. And I think that's the perfect time to talk about a few of them that I was talking about. So, in the Salesforce ecosystem, there's actually been a 109% annual increase in Salesforce specifically targeted attacks. And just in 2025 alone, there's been 700 or more Salesforce orgs that were compromised, and with average breach costs of like 9 million to over 100 million. There's even one that's over a billion that's in the breach. So I think those are some of the very, I would say, alarming things that are happening right now in the Salesforce ecosystems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing a number of these breaches, security events going on around the world. Massive increase in the uptake of the actual successful occurrence of those. On the Veeam side of things, when we look at this from a traditional data protection, backup and recovery perspective, we're seeing a continuous surge in bad actors, specifically going after backup data. And that is born from our response to these bad actors, right? When things like ransomware and malware were, I don't want to say just coming about, but really starting to bloom 10, 12, 15 years ago, it was very much an exfiltration attempt. And as people started getting better at encrypting their data, so even if data is exfiltrated, very difficult, if not impossible for people to read, the bad actors started moving towards, okay, well, let's encrypt this data ourselves. Let's modify this data, or hell, let's just delete this data ourselves. And that way we can then wreak havoc on the production environment, and they don't have a good backup to, which is more important than backup, recover from and resume business operations. So yeah, 92% of organizations state that bad actors, once they get into their environment, are specifically going after that backup data in order to hinder any successful recovery attempts. Matt, what are some of the tactics, the entrances, the strategies that you see these guys using to get into the environment, specifically Salesforce?
Sure. So we can talk about some of the latest data breaches that we've been seeing that have affected, companies all over the board, such as Alliance Insurance, Cisco. We have Coca-Cola, FedEx, Home Depot, I mean, even security companies themselves, like Tenable, Dynatrace. I mean, the list goes on. Which is the thing though is it's not really Salesforce itself that's getting breached. It's customers that have misconfigured environments or environments that attackers have taken advantage of. And specifically, the biggest breach that's been going on is with the OAuth applications. And the way that attack has worked, what was that attackers would use a phishing attack, so voice phishing, to call in or get people to click on a phishing attack to call a number that looks legitimate. Then the attacker poses as the IT department or someone they trust and has them install an application inside of Salesforce. Then what happened was they would get them to get the user to give them a code. So it's very similar for all of you. So like if you use Netflix out there, you always get that code for your TV you put in from your phone to your TV. It's the same way with Salesforce. So they'd give them this code, and it was a 4-digit code. And then at that point, they pretty much had access to their entire Salesforce environment for whatever that user had access. And a lot of times it's that people are being targeted are these administration users. So people with high levels of access in their system, and then they're getting access to the entire org. So, I mean, there's a couple breaches here that I'll talk about. The favorite one I like to talk about is Coca-Cola. Well, I mean, none of these are favorite for me, really. I mean, they're very sad because it's affecting a lot of people like you and me. But Coca-Cola, that one was just a pure phishing attack. So they basically just got phished, and then they were in their system for over a year, just slowly siphoning data. And then you have Alliance Life Insurance, and that one was with that OAuth that I was talking about. And there are 2.8 million records that were stolen through this malicious OAuth app. And then the bigger one to talk about really is the Drift breach. And also recently Gainsight, the same thing happened where they were a vendor and their tokens themselves were compromised as a vendor. And so it wasn't just a single customer who got compromised. It was all of their customers as a vendor had their tokens compromised. And then that gave those attackers access to all the customers' environments. So a lot of scary stuff there, Sam, from a Salesforce, what's going on in the Salesforce world right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned earlier and that I really want to drive in on is misconfigurations, right? Like Salesforce as an environment is wildly secure. There are so many measures in place managed by Salesforce to keep that data protected, secure, resilient. But that admin error, user error, the misconfiguration is kind of like really what's leaving the back door open, right? The vulnerabilities for folks. And when Matt and I were chatting, I can't remember if it was earlier this week or last week, Matt, but you startled me with a statistic about the number of setup pages. It was over 1,000, like 1,200 and something setup pages to go through, right?
Yeah, I heard yesterday at the conference while someone from product was presenting. I think it's 1,244, somewhere around there, different setup pages in Salesforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of area to go wrong, right? And certainly we're going to talk about some of the things that we can do to help prevent that. But even in the absence of like technical vulnerabilities, what Matt's been talking about, the phishing attempts, voice phishing attempts, definitely skyrocketing. We're even seeing some of these bad actor groups like Scattered Spider and Shiny Hunters, like teaming up together, almost like a strategic business alliance, and going out there and turning these attacks into a service that they can monetize and other people can monetize. So Scattered Spider are out there handling the social engineering aspect of it. The Shiny Hunters are dealing with the extortion piece. And there's multiple ways that they can extort you by threatening your data. But, publicly available instances that spring to mind with that, Google, Cisco, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, Qantas Airways. Again, none of these guys had technical vulnerabilities that were exploited as part of this attack, right? It was a phishing attempt, impersonating IT stuff to someone with some elevated privileges within Salesforce. They point them to a connected app setup. Here's your 8-digit code that Matt was talking about. And now all of a sudden you have a malicious app that is authorized within Salesforce with that user's permissions, right? They've got the persistent tokens, so you can bypass other security things like MFA. And let's not forget, this is legitimate CRM access, right? So they can go in there, they can exfiltrate, they can dwell, they can leak, they can choose to do whatever they want. And it's very easy for them to cover their tracks and blend in, right? So you don't know that they're in your system until they've decided to go and do something. You mentioned Coca-Cola taking a year, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. That's what's kind of the scary thing, and also some of the stuff. What some of the more sneakier ones were doing was they'd go in and they'd use Salesforce's own APIs, or against the customer, because a lot of the APIs will tell you what are your limits, what are things configured as. So the way the attack will actually work, once they get access, they're not going to immediately just start pulling millions of records out, or thousands and thousands. They're going to start looking around, seeing what you have configured, what products you've enabled within Salesforce. Then they're going to start looking around and see, okay, if you have, for example, Shield enabled, and then, or other products, saying, okay, what are your thresholds when you have alerts configured in Salesforce? So they're actually inspecting, they're not just stealing your data, they're inspecting your metadata to see, how do we stay under the radar? How do we start slowly siphoning data off without triggering any alarms? So it's kind of, I love house analogies. It's kind of like a thief breaks into your house, but instead of them busting down the front door, or breaking the window open, or triggering the alarm, maybe what they do is maybe they cut the glass on the window and just walk through, and so that didn't trigger your alarm because nothing happened, and then now they're in your house. But I think we'll talk a little bit more about, there's other things you can be doing, even if they're trying to sneak under the radar, so that you can ensure that that you still catch them even when they get in there. And I think that the whole goal here is there's a metric out there that IBM has put out, and I always get it slightly wrong, but I think it's 206 days that it takes before a breach is detected, and another 70 days to clear that breach and contain the breach. So really what you're talking about is 276 days from the time someone walks in your house to the time you kick them out. So the question, think about what can people be doing in your environment in 276 days. But the bigger thing you want to think is, if when you are breached, and unfortunately the truth is you will be breached someday. It is just a fact of the matter. The question is what you can do to minimize the time that someone is in your house, and how you can kick them out really quick and minimize that damage.
yeah, I love that you say it's cliche to say it's not a matter of if, but when. It's just key to remember that these bad actors essentially have an unlimited number of attempts on your environment, and they only have to be right once to get in, start dwelling and wreaking havoc. You, on the other hand, you've got to block each and every single one of those to be successful, and that is just not feasible. And that's really kind of where the notion of backup and recovery, which is often not thought about when it comes to things like SaaS applications, really come into play. Like, how can I roll back my environment to the last good state before people started coming in and causing all sorts of chaos? How can I roll that back as quickly as possible, whether that is a full rollback because we just don't know what's been compromised, or whether it is a relatively small blast radius limited to a specific number of accounts, or whatever it might be, data sets. How can we granularly restore that to do so quickly? But it's a tough job, and from a securing Salesforce perspective, like, an ounce of prevention is worth a kilogram of cure. I'm English living in America. I'm mixing metric and imperial, but the prevention is critical. But you still need that kind of, like, I don't want to call it last resort, but it is your best resort if things truly have gone wild, right? And I think that's where the notion of shared responsibility comes in, right, Matt?
Yep, exactly. And before we move on to shared responsibility, there's one thing I wanted to touch on this current slide we're looking at before we pop to the next one is that also it's not just about hackers. And so I talk, there's a lot of things I've talked about people before about backing up your data and things like that. And a lot of people are thinking about hey, it's either outages from the provider. Does the provider go down? And what people are not really thinking about is the internal users within their own environments. So a lot of times it's not just the hackers you're thinking about, is did your admin accidentally um, try to use data loader or something else, do a data migration in Salesforce, but they clicked the wrong button, or they did the wrong thing, or they're doing a delete, but they accidentally formatted it wrong, and instead of deleting 10 records, they deleted 10,000 records. Or maybe they did a mass update and they updated the wrong field in Salesforce. So these are other things thinking about outside of just cybersecurity risks from your data in Salesforce, thinking of just human error, or like I said, other types of like the third-party vulnerabilities you have with Drift, even though Drift and Gainsight, they were breached, and then that could then that actually then that caused that downtrend. But then you also think about, what if your provider had an accident? What if they made an update to their system? Actually, I'll use a great example. It was a Cloudflare where it took down the whole internet was because of a configuration change that someone did wrong. So if your provider is moving data in your org or updating your data, maybe your provider updates and messes up your data. And so I think there's a lot of things to be thinking about as well from your data, not only about data breaches, but other kinds of things that can affect your data too.
The provider piece is interesting. I haven't seen it with Salesforce, but I've certainly seen it with other platforms. So my role spans multiple different platforms, not just Salesforce, but Google and the UniSuper event really jumps out to me there. So UniSuper is a superannuation fund, retirement fund based out of Australia. And was it last year? I think it was May last year. Google had made changes to their projects and accounts that ultimately caused a complete eradication of their data. They had backups within Google as well, but those were also impacted. And this is a provider error. Again, I've not seen it happen with Salesforce myself, but the only thing that actually saved UniSuper and the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of pensions that they were looking after was the fact that they had got a production fresh copy of that data out of Google, and it was actually into Azure. And they had like a backup copy living on a completely different platform that wasn't subjected to the changes that Google made that resulted in the data deletion. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Yes, bad actors, user error, malicious insiders, but also provider error, but very few and far between.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I think the provider are like you said, very few and far between. I'm sure that hasn't even happened again with Google. And I do remember one instance with Salesforce, the same thing happened where they were doing a failover test, which is normal, and the two completely unrelated errors when they were switching over from one data center to another center happened exactly at the same time. So it's like the perfect storm. And then that corrupted data in an entire pod. I mean, and a pod is a multitude of different customers. And then they were trying for hours trying to get everything to start back up. And then finally they couldn't start back in the history. I've never seen it happen before. Salesforce had to restore from tape. And I believe it was about 4 hours of customer data that was lost during that time from the tape restore. So it depends on your business. Maybe, if you're not really a huge high transactional business, 4 hours might not mean that much to you. But if you're a business that's generating a lot of transactions, a lot of data, maybe you're a bank importing transactions in, or your healthcare provider getting applications for healthcare or other things, or a bank trying to get loan applications, you could actually lose quite a bit of financial data, that's impacting your business in just 4 hours. So I think that's a great example where, like you said, it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, that's also just as catastrophic as a cyber attack.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the shared responsibility model. I know Salesforce has their own shared responsibility model, as do pretty much every cloud provider out there. Hey, this is actually Google's that are on the screen. They're all different providers, different platforms, but they're all saying pretty much the same thing, right? So, and I really like Google's because it shows the delineation between different categories of services, right? So for something that's on premises, fully owned, managed, maintained by the user, of course, they're responsible for everything. But as we start to transition workloads into public cloud services, so for example, here, infrastructure as a service, these are your like virtual machines in the cloud that you'll install your OS and applications on. What's clear here is that you'll start to transition some of that to the provider. And the more managed you go, right? So then you start to get to platform as a service and ultimately software as a service, the more responsibility you're transitioning to that provider. But I think the big thing to note here is that you're not transitioning all of the responsibility. It is a shared responsibility between you and the provider. Matt, what's your take on that?
Sure, sure. Actually, this is something I've done a lot on. In my book, I have a whole section on shared responsibility because I find that that's one of the, I guess, the first most misunderstood things for some reason in the Salesforce ecosystem, especially by executives. I find there's actually a part of a alliance called the Low Code Security Alliance, and we wrote a 40-something page white paper called The Hard Truths About Shared Responsibility in Salesforce. And really, when it comes down to it, what is shared responsibility? Well, as you said, it means Salesforce brings the tools. It's your job to use those tools correctly. And if you're not using them correctly, that's where you get into trouble. And I think there is that middle ground where there is crossover. It's kind of like a Venn diagram. You have your side, Salesforce has their side, then you have a side that kind of intersects as well. So for example, with some of these data breaches out there, a lot of companies, they misconfigured Salesforce, but could Salesforce have had made their product a little bit more clear, a better way to navigate those 1,200 pages? Probably yes. And so I think there's a little bit of responsibility in the middle, but you can't just point the finger at Salesforce and say, hey, we were breached, so it's your fault, Salesforce. No, I mean, you configured your org, and then you made it so someone can come in. So really, you got to be thinking about, where does my responsibility lie in this? And then one thing I really hadn't thought about until recently was shared responsibility and backing up your data. Because I think about security, and I think that's the normal thing people talk about, but don't really think of what's your responsibility of making sure your data is safe and is correct. I mean, even like we said, talking about with data breaches, but also with other things. I mean, Salesforce backs up your data to tape, but it's not really, their backups aren't really targeted or designed at restoring a single customer or a single record in Salesforce. It's more about the catastrophic thing that we were talking about earlier happened to restore all their customers if something happened to their organization. And so it's really, again, up to you to ensure that from these other types of events outside of a big catastrophic failure in Salesforce, that you are able to restore your data. If a user overwrote your data, if you had a data breach, someone encrypted your data in Salesforce, there's different things like that's really that shared responsibility comes into from a data backup perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like there absolutely is nuance between the different platforms. There's nuance between the different degrees of service that you're leveraging. This is overgeneralizing, but it's irrespective of what you're doing. On-prem, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, Salesforce, Microsoft 365, AWS, Azure. The data that you put on or in the cloud is your data. And just like you would on premises, just like you would with your own computer, your cell phone, it's your responsibility to back it up. And if you don't, there is no guarantee that you will get that data back, right? And
exactly. Sometimes I think there's just things, it's not even on purpose, it's an accident.
Yeah.
Like I'm constantly researching different ways people can breach your Salesforce or other environments. And there's one product that Salesforce has called Shield and Shield encryption, where they'll let you encrypt your fields in your data, and then you even have a bring your own key option, so you can use the key to encrypt the data. So I was curious if what would happen if someone deleted that key that was used to encrypt all your data. What's kind of interesting is if you delete that key in Salesforce, all of your data turns to question marks. And that you could have, I mean, there's one use case where you could have a bad actor that if they got access to the admin account and they knew about that, they could go in and just delete that key if you're using bring your own key, and all the data is now turned to question marks. But you could also have another thing would be, what if you have an admin who is just doing a couple things and they're not really paying attention. They accidentally click that delete button as well, and they delete that key, and they don't have a copy of it somewhere, and all of a sudden all your data is gone, just like that. And Salesforce can't get that back. So that's some other things I'd think about too, with just using the usage of Salesforce correctly again.
Do you know what it kind of reminds me of? I'm not sure if you've seen this, but there's a guy out there in Great Britain who had his Bitcoin stored on his little thumb drive and threw it away, and it's worth something crazy like $70 million right now. And he has quit his job, and he is spending his life like rummaging through landfills looking for this key, right? Because it yes, it is absolutely necessary and very, very critical to encrypt that data, to make sure that only those people that have the privilege, the access to see it, can see it. But it also kind of represents a single point of failure. And that if that goes away, especially if it's a bring your own key, something that you manage, like a customer managed key in KMS, whatever it might be, once that's gone, like, you cannot access that data.
Yeah, if you broke your key, or your key just broke. And so I know this story very well. I remember following it when it happened. And I also remember that he was saying anyone that helped him found it, he was going to give them like $10 million or something like that. And he was paying people, digging up landfills, trying to find it. I mean, it's a really crazy story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Matt, your T-shirt, it says only you can, I can't even read now, prevent and contain Salesforce data breaches. So let's just start to talk to these guys about what are some of the best practices, what are some of the things that they can do from that preventative and containment perspective. And I'm certainly happy to talk about that specific to the backup data, and from a remediative perspective as well.
Sure. So I think the first thing is going back to our Coke example, where they were in their house for almost a year and they didn't even know it. And there's only so much public information about what happened, so we can only speculate. But I mean, I think Salesforce Shield is one of your best tools out there for that. It's not cheap, but also I think I've heard they actually have a free tier now too. But Shield has a few different products. The first is event monitoring, and that's, I think, the main one in this kind of case, where it's gonna let you be able to key off of certain events, and has anomaly detection and also transaction security policies, where you can have a policy that can automatically do things such as disable a user if a certain kind of anomaly happens, and so I think that's one of the best things. There's also a lot of other providers out there that can extend that, but I think Shield is kind of one of those best things. Other things that you should be doing in Salesforce today is reviewing all of your OAuth apps, all the usage of any of those apps. Is there any app you have installed today that looks suspicious? Block any apps that potentially could be suspicious apps in your org if you've not already gone through doing that audit. There's a thing in Salesforce called API access control that lets you give much more granular access on APIs in Salesforce. You should always enable that as well. So, and my favorite one actually is this thing that really would help with a lot of these breaches, is enforcement of IP restrictions on every request in Salesforce. Because by default, what Salesforce does is most admins know in Salesforce, you can add IP ranges into the profiles, for example, and then you'll be required to can't log in if you're not within those ranges. What most people don't understand, though, is that's only checked on login, not on every single request. But with all these OAuth attacks, they're not really logging in. They're already logged in because they have the token. And so they're bypassing that. So if you go to session settings in Salesforce and enable IP checking on every request, that should be able to block those malicious attacks from coming into your org, because now you're blocking these OAuth types of attacks, API attacks, and even man-in-the-middle types of attacks. So those are some of my favorite ones. And one other is more of looking at geographic anomalies. So using platforms like, I know Okta can do that. There's others. But if, let's say, your users usually are logging in from the US, maybe Europe, but all of a sudden you start having a user logging in from China. And again, that's that whole piece I was talking about. Maybe they logged in initially from US, but then the subsequent requests you start seeing coming from China, that should be another one of those red flags where you could immediately block them, because they're now logging in from a geo that is nowhere near the geo where they initially established that connection. So I think there's a lot of things on there that kind of cover there, but there's a number more I could talk about, but I'll let you kind of take the floor for that.
The locking down of IPs as quickly as you possibly can really rings close to home for me, with some of the hands-on lab environments that we've created. And yeah, we had one of those erroneous IPs come in, and they're very, very ring fenced. It's a hands-on lab environment. There's no real data or whatever it might be, but they decided to go in. This was an Azure hosted environment, and spin up 1,000 scale sets. A scale set is a group of virtual machines in Azure. It's 1,000 virtual machines. So 1,000 of these 1,000, it's a million machines, right? And they spun them up, and we found it as quick as possible and brought it back down. But you can imagine there's no real data here. There's nothing that they can actually take. It's all dummy data. But what the incurrence was running a million virtual machines, even for a very, very short amount of time, has real cost associated with it as well that is going to hit your bill, right? So maybe there's not the reputational, the compliance, the privacy component of this. It's just the monetary aspect of the havoc that they've caused. It's
oh yeah. I mean, I think just the recovery from any these incidents, that can take months, or even some people even years to recover from, depending on how bad it is. I know the story that I talk about in my book here, we found about the breach pretty quick. Well, took about a year, and someone found out the breach. But then we have to do the remediation from it and fix the breach, and all those different steps to get to the resolution. And sometimes the resolution takes a lot longer than the actual breach itself, and actually most times it does.
And this is super pertinent to some of the things going on in the chat and Q&A right now, Matt. So we'll get into this because this is about granular recovery. So Adam makes a comment in the chat that says, we definitely experience the pain of bad data imports. It's often the small internal mistakes, not the big hacks, that cause the biggest and longest headaches. And then, it's Adam in the chat Q&A as well. Thanks for being so engaging, Adam. Adam, you mentioned my team is constantly dealing with accidental deletions. What's the single fastest and simplest way to restore a single specific record that a sales rep deleted just an hour ago? Matt and I have also spoke about, a lot of people do talk about backup, but they don't talk about recovery. And no, not all recovery is created equal, right? Yes, you can absolutely do a full instance restore, but you've got to think about the cost, the time, the resourcing taken to do that. If it truly is just a few records, if you can have the ability to easily filter records in production that are different to yesterday's backup, and then just select those, whether it's a single record or a collection of records, and just granularly restore those, that mean time to recover is shrunk massively, because instead of huge data sets, metadata sets, it's just a very small subset. And again, it's not because it's a big hack where someone's come in and tried to cause as big a blast radius as possible. It's just an internal error where a sales rep has accidentally deleted a record that they absolutely need, or whatever it might be. Granular recovery is critical.
Yep, exactly. And I see another question here from Mitch that I could probably take if you don't mind. It's very close to home for me and stuff I talk about all the time. He says that most companies he's worked with, Salesforce is often managed by its own admins separate from the IT practice. Since those admins are not typically as familiar with or concerned with proper due diligence with security or auditing practice, what do you suggest is the best starting point, low barrier to entry for a Salesforce admin to start securing their tenant, knowing a lot of these folks aren't as security savvy as IT? Actually, I talk about this in my security office hours a lot, and actually, I think there's actually I find issues on both sides of the house. So you have the easiest way to explain. First, you have the Salesforce people that know very little about security frameworks and security, but they know generally a lot about Salesforce. Then you've got the security people and the IT practices that know a lot about security and almost nothing about Salesforce. And I can tell you, I get in my own organization, when we're, customers or we're onboarding new customers, we get these really long security questionnaires from IT security. And I can tell you that those people, when they're giving these questionnaires, I would say 90% of the questions are irrelevant and not have anything to do with Salesforce, or they're not scoped right. For example, they'll say, do you have role-based security? Yes, Salesforce has it. Check the box. It's not asking, do you have Salesforce permission sets, permission down to this level, or using permission sets or permission set groups, and detail the type of permissions and how your integration user is accessing my data in Salesforce. So I think really when it comes down to answer your question is, it's really it's a partnership you need to establish with your admins, because and the admins, I've told on the Salesforce side that they should help hold lunch and learn sessions with the IT security, helping to elevate them, educate them about Salesforce and things that you can Salesforce security practices. And then IT security, you guys need to start the same thing. Reach out to their Salesforce people, help them educate you, and you help educate them about some of these security frameworks to try. And because really what I think needs to happen in the ecosystem from this perspective is coming up with SaaS targeted, and especially Salesforce targeted security assessments, because I have not seen one out there yet that is effective, from these teams. And that's why I think a lot of these breaches have happened, because these security assessments themselves are not effective against Salesforce specific applications, or even think of ServiceNow and others, but Salesforce is the really big one I'm seeing with things like this.
It's a really important point that you bring up, Mitch. Back when I really started taking over the public cloud side of business at Veeam almost 10 years ago, we would do research out there and ask questions. Who is responsible for protecting public cloud resources? It was specific to IaaS and PaaS, so no SaaS was out there. But 10 years ago, overwhelmingly, the cloud admins, the cloud architects, the people living and breathing inside the cloud were the ones that were responsible for protecting that. And your traditional data center guys, IT operations, just had no idea what was going on there, and vice versa. And we have this big disconnect as public cloud became more and more, I guess, ingrained within the organization. We started to see those not the roles converge, but the responsibilities start to blend a little bit more. So that 90-10 split started to be 50-50. And right now it's almost at 90-10, but in the other direction, right? In which the IT operations team are the ones responsible for, the data protection, the backup, the recovery, whatever it might be, irrespective of the platform, whether it's a business application, a cloud platform, whatever it might be. And with them being the ones that are responsible for it, they're very much focused on vendor consolidation, right? They kind of want one throat to choke to protect all of their data estate across all of these platforms. They don't want multiple different point products from multiple different vendors. And with that, things like role-based access within the product itself to then empower these business application owners, Salesforce admins, Salesforce architects, cloud engineers, cloud admins with backup or restore capabilities. So we still have this core practice where things are properly governed, they're compliant, they're secure, they're protected, but we still empower the application owner, in this case again Salesforce, with the capabilities that they need to go in and do a restore without having to launch like a ticket to IT and blah blah blah, and just drawing out that time to recover. So there's absolutely other ways within the product, kind of day one, day two operations that can help to bring those teams much closer together, where sometimes they haven't even spoken before.
Mm-hmm.
So look at some of these other questions. Paul asks, what approach should shared responsibility models play between Salesforce, Veeam, and customers in defining resilience boundaries? Matt, do you want to have a shot at that one while I just try and fully understand it?
I'm actually trying to understand it myself, so I know it's trying to find where that question is. I don't see it.
Maybe, Paul, you could clarify exactly what you mean, and then that way we can give you exactly what you need. I would hate to go off on a tangent that isn't applicable to you.
Okay, I see here. What approach shared?
While we're waiting for...
I can actually answer this. I can actually answer this. I understand kind of what he's saying. It's like, what approach should shared responsibility models play between Salesforce, Veeam, and customers in defining resilience boundaries? So I mean, that shared responsibility model, of course, there is between Salesforce and yourself as a company, but you also have that shared responsibility between providers that you're using on the Salesforce platform, just like Veeam. And I think that's really what he's asking is, okay, where does that line on from a Salesforce perspective, Veeam perspective, and the customer perspective? And so I think maybe you can talk to the Veeam perspective on shared responsibility, but I think in general, I would say from a Salesforce and any vendor out there that you're going to bring onto your Salesforce platform, that shared responsibility is first understanding, what are the tools that your provider has. Same thing with Salesforce, making sure that you're setting up that provider correctly, you're configuring it correctly. The other part you should be responsible for is your integration user, that you're allowing them to connect into your Salesforce environment, right? I've seen so many times that customers as a whole will give full admin access to those integration users, and generally, unless it's backup, for the most part, you shouldn't be giving full admin access to those integration users. It's really on you defining what level of access your external companies have to your product. It's on you to ensure that you're configuring those external providers correctly. It's on them to ensure that they have securely created their product. Let's go back to some of these data breaches, like the with some of these providers like Gainsight and what is it, and the drift, Salesloft drift. Well, that it was on them because they did not secure their tokens that they're storing for their customers correctly. It wasn't the customers that exposed those tokens; it was those providers. So that's kind of where I see that line is between the Salesforce, the provider, and the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. From a Veeam perspective, I guess I'm actually gonna kick the slides back a couple because we do have self-managed options, including for Salesforce, as well as the SaaS option. Where is our shared responsibility model? I believe it's this one. Yes, here we go. When it comes to our self-managed options, this is an on-premises software. You are responsible for everything. Veeam Data Cloud, this is our SaaS offering. Yes, we absolutely have that notion of shared responsibility. It's, of course, all in things like the EULA, but areas where you can go wrong there, same as what Matt's saying, right? Yeah, you can go in there and custom define users and roles and permissions. And if you just leave a completely wide open gate, no MFA, anything like that, no identity provider integration, then, of course, access to Veeam itself is going to be, or your instance of Veeam will be compromised, and someone could go in there and choose to do nefarious things. Another example would be something like the actual backup data that we are storing. So within Veeam Data Cloud, we include unlimited storage within your subscription. We license very, very simply. We just index it against the user. It's one single tier. Everything's included, right? So that's your backup, it's your recovery, it is your sandbox seeding, it is the unlimited storage component, all included within that. On the storage, where your backups are, you have access to read those, but you do not have access to go in and augment those. And that's really critical when it comes to backup, because I spoke about that at the beginning of the session, whereby 92% of bad actors seeking to extort organizations will directly go after the backups. It's really critical that those backups are tamper-proof. They're immutable, right? We've got to place that data in what's called a worm state. Stands for write once, read many. So within Veeam, you are responsible for configuring the policies and the retention periods. So what am I backing up? How often am I backing it up? Where am I storing it? And how long am I storing it for? So that's an area, like if you only go in and create a retention period for 1 week, once that week expires, that data's gone. That would be your responsibility because it's part of the policy that you've set. What would be our responsibility is that immutable nature of the backup. So another good example here is Veeam Vault. It's a cyber vault that we use for on-premises data, but again, we place it in that immutable state, and you set that policy. So you say, I must retain this for, let's say, 3 years. And for 3 years, that backup data cannot be deleted. It cannot be modified. It cannot be encrypted by the bad actor. Of course, it in and of itself is encrypted in flight and at rest to protect that sensitive data. But those things as guardrails are specifically there so that even if a bad actor does get in, to a, like, let's say, a self-managed environment, they are not able to then go and they're not able to augment your backups to the point they are no longer reliable, right? It's the CIA triad: confidentially, I, integrity, and then A, availability, right? So there's definitely the guardrails within the policy, within the product, and I hope that answered that for you. Okay. Let's have a look. There's a few other questions here from Paul. I think this might be in response to your initial response, Matt, but Paul's saying, okay, clarifying hopefully. If Salesforce makes sure of platform uptime, Veeam provides backup and recovery, and customers manage their own configurations, how can it be clearly defined who owns which part of resilience so nothing slips through the cracks?
I think that's the $100 million question. I mean, part of it is that there's, like I was talking before, it's kind of like a Venn diagram as well. Again, you have the part on the left that's the Salesforce part. You have the part on the right that's the customer part. And you have the part in the middle that's kind of those overlapping pieces. And unfortunately, in Salesforce, there are a lot of those areas that could be considered gray, but also there's a lot of places in Salesforce that's set up, and there's a lot of blind spots that are easily found. I think the way that you can help uncover some of those blind spots with automation and other vendors, there's a number of different vendors out there. I think you start with Shield, because that, in Salesforce at least, I can't talk to the Veeam side, but you start with Salesforce Shield, because that's exposing more monitoring data and different types of functionality that gives you more insight into your environment. Then there's other vendors, including Salesforce, has a security center. There's others out there you can tack onto that helps you interpret that Shield data better, and help you notify a lot faster. There's also thinking about, I would say, again, your protections then becomes those backups of not just your data, but your metadata, if someone changed it either on purpose or inadvertently. There's another thing that you can do a lot of times too, is maybe someone changed something in your prod, but it doesn't match what was in your repo. And you can do comparisons against your prod and your repo on routine basis to be able to identify if someone did change some of your metadata. Then you could quickly roll that back by doing like a restore of that metadata, or deployment in Salesforce is technically what it is.
Yeah, I love your notion of the Venn diagram, right? My advice would always be, what platform you're using to run, look at that shared responsibility model, look at what's your responsibility, and then figure out how you can uphold your end of that responsibility. And maybe that is something that is manual work. Maybe it's something that you automate. Maybe it's something that a vendor like Veeam can come in and help you with that. But
and I think there's also some other aspects to it that people don't think about. I mean, going beyond just the security, and I've asked this because I got asked this question a while back as well. They think, okay, where does that end for Salesforce? And specifically if you're hosting, let's say, on an AWS or Azure platform. Well, there is those responsibilities too, because if, for example, Azure goes down or AWS go down, or their APIs are slow and you can't deliver your vendor can't deliver the service to you fast enough, well, whose responsibility is that? in that case too. So I think there's that shared responsibility too, where the vendor can do the best they can to create maybe redundancies in case there is an outage in Azure, AWS. But if the entire system is lagging, there's not much they can do. And then the same thing goes with Salesforce. Okay, that vendor is also making calls to Salesforce. If Salesforce's APIs are lagging, there's not really a failover for that for the vendor. And so what can you do if Salesforce APIs are lagging, or you start hitting, being locked out of Salesforce APIs? So those are some other areas of shared responsibility you should be thinking about with your third-party vendors and Salesforce, and how they're interacting and engaging with Salesforce. Salesforce actually has a great product called Test Center that allows you to do testing, and in sandboxes with real limits, that helps with some of that too. It's not cheap again, but if you do have an organization and it does make financial sense, maybe that's something to look into too, to see testing in certain high volume types of situations, if there's going to be any kind of latency or issues as well with your data.
Agreed. All right, we've got 4 minutes left, so we'll start to bring it home. Adam's been very interactive as well, so I just want to take this one. The idea of having a copy of our Salesforce data completely separate from the Salesforce infrastructure is the only way to feel truly secure against large-scale platform outages or unique security threats. Okay, maybe not a question, but a comment. I would agree, Adam. I mentioned the UniSuper example earlier. Having that backup copy outside of Google and on Azure was ultimately the only thing that brought that organization back. I do think this notion of having, we in the backup land, we work on something called the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. It started as the 3-2-1 rule from a photographer. It means 3 copies of your data, 2 different types of media, 1 offsite. So in your instance, Adam, the 3 copies of your data, as this example would, or actually, let's just go back to the UniSuper example, because it's easier to answer in such a short space of time. The 3 copies of the data would be the production instance on Google, the backup on Google, and then the backup copy on Azure. The 2 different types of media would be the disk, the managed disks that are attached to the Google Compute Engine VMs, but then also the object storage that is powering Google Cloud Storage and Azure Blob. And then the 1 offsite is going to be that that copy on Azure. It's not just offsite, i.e. like in a different cloud region, but within the same cloud provider. It is in a completely different region on a completely different cloud provider. I mentioned earlier 3-2-1-1-0, like the additional 1 and 0 means 0 stands for no errors when going through your testing. So Matt spoke about that earlier, but testing, like building a good testing culture and planning and practicing culture is absolutely critical. The other one, number 1 that's in there, stands for 1 that is offline, air-gapped, or immutable, right? So this is ultimately making sure that backup data is tamper-proof, either by principle of least privilege, a physical air gap like tape that Matt was mentioning about earlier, or the immutability. Once it's been committed to disk, it can't be changed.
Yep. And one thing I would add to that, since we only have a minute or so left, is also thinking about restorability. A lot of people they think about backing up. They don't think about, can I restore it? Can you restore everything? Can you restore a single record? Can you restore a single field? And if you have more of like objects linked to others, like relationships, how far down do your relationships restore? Can you go 5 levels down, 6 levels down? And are those relationships coming back as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The metadata is equally as critical to back up as the data within Salesforce as well, right? So your schemas, your configurations, automations, how that data interacts with one another.
Yep, exactly. And then since we have 50 seconds left, I can close with the final slide that we had, which is some really quick things you should do for your data. And I think the biggest thing I would say is create a security champions program. Train your admins and your security Salesforce people on evolving threats, on security frameworks. Conduct simulated like voice phishing attacks. Test your administrators separately, ensuring that those because they are those high value targets. I think those are some of the really big things. I mean, really creating that security mindset within your entire organization. And I think, again, test, test, test. I mean, just because, it don't just have them do security awareness training, test to make sure it's actually effective.
Agreed. And you know what? Matt and I didn't rehearse this, but we're right at the top of the hour. It's like it was planned. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Matt. I hope you have too, and more importantly, I hope that the audience has enjoyed the conversation today. That you've come away with something new that you've learned, maybe something actionable, and of course, we're always here to help. So I just want to say personally, thank you for everyone for joining today.
Yep, thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone spending the time with us today.
Awesome. Matt, Sam, thank you so much. It's been fantastic. And I'm just going to do my final song and dance, but I want to thank you both for doing such a great job, for sharing so much information. I really appreciate it, and enjoyed having you here and listening to you both. All right, everybody, as we wrap up here, we've just got two last little bits of fun. We are going to be giving, first and foremost, a quick round of thank yous to everyone here. So again, thank you both to Matt and Sam for being here and for sharing their expertise. Thank you to Salesforce and Veeam for making today possible. And of course, thank you to all of you out there in the audience for being here, asking so many great questions, being interactive, really wonderful turnout. And it's just so great to see so many people here as part of this learning community. So thanks a lot. We are going to be launching a survey. It takes maybe 30 seconds. This is just for us here at Smart Brief to see how this is meeting your needs, how the information is landing, if you enjoy everything, platform moderation content. So again, a quick pulse check, and that just helps us guide where we're going and keep on top of our game and make sure we're doing the best for you. So if you don't mind that, it's going to pop up where the chat docs Q&A has been over the last little bit. Also, I do want to remind you all to visit the docs tab. We are going to be closing this out here any second. So do check out Matt's book, the Low Code Security Alliance, in there as well. There's the ebook from Veeam, as well as if you do want to get your hands on this, try it out for yourself. You can book a demo and get things started right away. So those are all in the docs tab. Last little bit of fun, as I mentioned, we do have a prize. $250 Amazon gift card is going out to one lucky winner, and that lucky winner is Mitch Rebello from Kansas. So Mitch, huge congrats to you. We're going to reach out after the session, let you know how you can claim your prize, and we'll get it over to you right away. And other than that, if you love the session, you want to check out any other webinars coming down the pipeline from SmartBrief, you can go to events.smartbrief.com, check out the full calendar there. You can also go to that QR code on your screen. But other than that, until we see you on another webinar again soon, I'm wishing you all an absolutely fantastic rest of your days. Take care, everybody.